A Night at the Inn, a tale from a marshal in a foreign town. This story was recounted to me by a friend in law enforcement. That year I was dispatched to Ashton, a small town, for gathering evidence related to a case. Due to the urgency, I hadn't coordinated with the local police station, and as night fell, it was too late to return. I had no choice but to find a motel in town to stay for the night, planning to head back first thing in the morning. Ashton was a small town of just over 200 residents, mostly featuring typical wooden houses found in rural America, with the exception of a 3-story building at the train station. I first checked the state-run motel at the station, but it was dismally dirty and shabby. The walls were stained, and the room had nothing but a wooden bed and a kettle on the floor. The sight of the thick, dark blankets on the bed made me nauseous. I was convinced they harbored enough bugs to form an army. What's more, the broken window in the room allowed the smell of unwashed bodies and the loud snoring from the next room to waft in. Clearly, it was occupied by a group of laborers. Despite the middle-aged woman's insistence that this was the best room available, the only private one for $80 a night, and even with a discount to $60, I hurriedly left to find a privately run inn. Soon, I came across a 2-story building that seemed quite decent. This inn, facing southeast, had a solid, dark facade with red wooden eaves that danced in the wind. 2 red cylindrical columns stood at the entrance like steel nails, securing the structure. I approached the window marked Crescent Inn. The dim light from the incandescent bulb barely lit the interior, where a man in his late 50s was smoking a pipe, the scent pungent. Before I could speak, he asked if I needed a room. Upon my affirmative response, he flicked ash from his pipe and mentioned that there was just enough space for one more in the 4-person room. Not keen on sharing a room, I inquired about a private room, offering to pay extra. The man looked me over, a bit dismissively, and informed me that there were no private rooms left. With the night deepening and unwilling to return to the station motel, I pressed him for a solution, explaining that I was carrying important documents and a firearm, items that couldn't be compromised. After scrutinizing me and consulting an old almanac, muttering to himself, he finally nodded, noting that she wouldn't be coming tonight. Just as he was about to confirm, he paused, mentioning that someone else might show up. He then sternly asked if I had any blood debts. Surprised and slightly irritated by the question, I identified myself as a police officer on official duty, showing my badge and ID. Satisfied, the old man registered me and led me to a small attic room on the 2nd floor. As he opened the door, a refreshing scent wafted out. The room, with its sheer curtains, white linens, and pristine bedding, seemed well worth the $200 for the night. A vase with fresh flowers sat atop a table, and the large bed, adorned with purple trims and intricate carvings, was quite elegant. The best part was a north-facing window bathing the room in moonlight. The old man, upon leaving, reminded me to keep the window open for the moonlight and left with a stern, almost warning look in his eyes. I assured him that I preferred sleeping with the window open. After he left, feeling genuinely exhausted, I lay down to rest. Remembering the important documents and firearm with me, I decided to close the small window. After all, I was past the age for romantic notions. Just as I settled down, I realized the date had shifted to the 15th of July, according to the lunar calendar. Lying in bed, the smell of clean linens filled my senses, and I thought I'd finally get a good night's sleep. However, as time passed into the late night, I felt as if someone was breathing hot air on my face, tickling and simultaneously unsettling me. Startled awake, I looked around but saw nothing in the darkness. My decision to close the window now casting the room in pitch black. As a detective with 8 years of experience, I was keenly aware of my surroundings, yet I was certain the room was empty. Was it just a dream? But why did it feel so vivid? As I was about to drift back to sleep, I heard a clear sound of crying nearby. Sitting up, gripping my firearm, I recognized it as the sobbing of a little girl, seemingly close by. Deciding to investigate, I took my documents, secured my gun, and stepped outside. The moon had vanished and the night was exceptionally dark, but my years in law enforcement had honed my vision, allowing me to see clearly up to 100 feet away. Approaching the source of the crying, I eventually saw a little girl in a white dress sitting in the middle of the street, sobbing uncontrollably. I cautiously approached her, noticing her round, tear-streaked face as I got closer. I called out, asking why she wasn't at home and why she was crying. Between sobs, she replied that her mother had hit her and didn't want her anymore. Assuming she was a child who had run out after a domestic dispute, I decided to escort her home. Asking where she lived, she pointed towards the very inn I was staying at. As I turned in surprise, a blinding light suddenly approached, a large truck barreling down the road. I leaped aside, narrowly avoiding it, but the girl was not so lucky. The truck crushed her, leaving a gruesome scene of blood and viscera. The truck stopped a short distance away, and I made a mental note of the license plate, Wink 742. Rushing towards the truck, determined to apprehend the driver, the door swung open, and a man stepped out. His face was distinct, with a mole near his eye. It was a face I knew too well, a criminal I had sentenced to death by firing squad, a sentence I had personally carried out. He had died without a sound. In my career, I had executed 3 people. One was a rapist, another a smuggler of guns and drugs, and this man a long-time fugitive for murder. I remembered him clearly because at the moment before execution, when asked for his last words, a moment when most speak the truth, he claimed innocence of the murder he was accused of. But without evidence, the sentence was carried out. The sight of him now shattered my composure. He looked at the bloody scene, hesitated, and then ran back to his truck. I shouted for him to stop, firing a warning shot into the air, but he continued, scrambling into the truck. I fired again, aiming for the vehicle, but missed, hitting the dashboard instead. The truck sped away, leaving only a trail of smoke. Approaching where the girl had been, I found nothing, no blood, no body. My skin crawled at the realization, and it dawned on me. The loud gunshots had roused no one in the town. The thought that executed criminals might seek revenge on their executors, a fear among my peers, suddenly seemed all too real. Returning to the inn, a mix of anger, fear, and confusion swirled within me. I knocked on the old man's door only to be met with a voice full of terror, pleading for mercy and babbling about not intending to cause harm. Mentioning his daughter and rituals performed for her, it was clear he was deeply disturbed. Ignoring the old man's ramblings, I made my way back to my room, only to see a glimpse of a woman in white entering it. My heart skipped a beat. Although I had my documents with me, I was compelled to follow and see who it was. Entering the room, I found it empty. The realization hit me hard. I was staying in a room that once belonged to someone who had passed away, with everything left as it was, including the bedding. Furious and terrified, I considered confronting the old man, but exhaustion and an overwhelming desire to leave took over. I barely remember how I made it through the rest of the night. At dawn, I heard a train arriving at the station and promptly left without looking back. Back at the station, I submitted my report and was granted a few days off due to my apparent distress. During my time off, I visited the traffic department and discovered that indeed, 3 years prior, on the 15th of July, a little girl was fatally struck by a hit-and-run driver in Ashton. The culprit never caught. Further investigation revealed a tragic chain of events of the girl. After being scolded by her mother, ran into the street where she was hit. The mother, consumed by guilt, poisoned herself that same night. The inn was named after her. Her husband went mad with grief and disappeared, leaving only the old man to watch over the empty house. I also tracked down the truck, now rusted and discarded, in a vehicle scrapyard. Chillingly, I found the bullet hole I had made, still fresh amidst the decay. I then traveled to the hometown of the executed criminal, discovering he had a twin brother who went missing as a child. I suspected that we had executed the wrong brother, the one responsible for a single murder, while the actual serial killer might still be at large. After reporting my findings, I requested early retirement, which was granted 3 months later for unspecified reasons. One being the unaccounted bullets I had fired that night. I'm now 49, and that haunting experience occurred 7 years ago. It has since left an indelible mark on my life and beliefs. A chilling encounter on the way home from an internet cafe. I grew up in a small town in California, about 7 months after a major earthquake had hit Northern California. I was around 14 years old, just in the 8th grade. The town, neither too close nor too far from the epicenter, had felt the quake's impact. Many buildings had collapsed, but thankfully, there weren't many casualties, as most people had managed to escape. During that time, since the buildings were unsafe, everyone had moved into temporary shelters and tents. For me, a gaming enthusiast, this presented an opportunity. Every night I would sneak out on my bike to the local gaming center in town. Living in tents meant my parents were none the wiser about my nightly escapades. I would usually leave around 11:30 p.m. and return from the gaming center around 3 a.m. This routine went on for about half a month. On the night of the incident, the moonlight was intermittent, casting eerie shadows on the deserted streets. Occasionally, the wind would rustle plastic bags, creating strange noises. As usual, after finishing my games, I rode my bike away from the gaming center, located in the town center. As I approached a corner to turn, I noticed a woman in white on the second floor of a building across the street. Bathed in the pale moonlight, her face was indistinct, her long black hair fluttering in the wind, yet eerily motionless. My first thought was wondering what she was doing awake at this hour, possibly sleepwalking. However, a sense of unexplained dread overcame me, and I pedaled faster, quickly turning the corner. Reaching a crossroads, a large black dog that usually slept outside a closed diner began barking furiously at me as if it had gone mad. I was perplexed. I passed by here often, and it had always been docile. Why was it so aggressive now? The situation became more alarming when the dog suddenly charged at me, attempting to bite. In a panic, I pedaled faster, focusing solely on getting home as quickly as possible. As I glanced back to see if the dog was still chasing me, an accident happened. I crashed into a pile of construction materials left over from the earthquake. My bike was thrown into the air, and I hit the ground hard, breaking the bike in two. When I looked back, the dog had returned to the diner's entrance. Injured and dragging the broken bike, I slowly made my way home, perplexed by the dog's behavior and the woman in white. The next day, my mum took me to the hospital for tetanus shots. She kept asking what had happened and how the bike ended up in such a state. At the hospital, I asked my mum about the building across from the gaming center. She hesitated at first, then quietly told me, "No one lives there now. People say that building is cursed. The shop underneath has been closed for a while. A family of 4 used to live there. The lady of the house once claimed to see a woman in white with long hair, covering her face with blood all over her, standing in the bathroom. After that, inexplicable things happened. The husband, for some unknown reason, killed his wife with a knife in that building. Since then, the place has been considered haunted, and numerous accidents have occurred at that crossroads. No one dares to live there anymore." As my mom continued, my hands were drenched in sweat, recalling the woman in white I had seen the night before. From then on, I never dared to sneak out at night, nor did I dare to pass by that intersection again. Even now, I've never wronged anyone and often do good deeds. I follow Buddhism and worship regularly, carrying positive energy with me. Yet the memory of that night still haunts me. I often wonder if the woman in white was sitting behind me on my bike, her long hair flowing, her expressionless face under the pale moonlight, and the big black dog barking and chasing as if it had seen her too. Maybe she was trying to teach me a lesson for my disobedience in sneaking out to play games. Anyway, it's better not to go out late at night. Mystery on the Midnight Highway. The wind howled cold as ice, while the rain softly whispered tales of sorrow. On that fateful day, my buddy Nick showed up in his LA-tagged car right outside our place. We were buzzing with excitement, ready for an adventure, undeterred by the light rain that seemed to play a somber tune. It was noon when we hit San Diego, our spirits high, as we roamed the city streets. But as the clock struck 6, we hopped back in the car, shivering from the cold, and set our sights back on LA, cruising along the famed California highway. Just as we were passing a small town, something downright bizarre caught my eye. A driverless blue mini-truck seemed to be tailing us, sending shivers down my spine. But here's the strange part. Neither Nick nor Eddie, our other friend, seemed to notice it. Was I the only one seeing this? Fast forward to 8:30 p.m., still on that endless stretch of road. The guys were lost in conversation, but my mind was racing with questions. Was this some newfangled self-driving tech? Or was my vision playing tricks on me? Maybe some prankster was behind the wheel. Before I could make heads or tails of it, Eddie tapped my shoulder, looking scared out of his wits. "Dude, look, why's that car behind us got no driver?" I tried to lighten the mood with a joke. "Oh, you haven't heard. That's the latest and greatest in car tech." But my words were cut short as the mysterious vehicle zoomed past us. Nick, with a look of sheer disbelief, gunned the engine, determined to keep up. "What in the world is that thing?" "A modified race car," he muttered. The chase was on, but the ghostly car soon vanished into the night. At 9:30 p.m., as the lights of LA came into view, our journey was far from over. Nick had family to visit in a town some miles away. Would we encounter that eerie car again? Nick seemed to think not, as we weren't on the same highway anymore. But little did we know, Nick had a hunch that the car wasn't of this world. It was something else, something otherworldly. And sure enough, 15 minutes later, there it was again, trailing us in the dead of night, keeping his distance. Nick's voice was stern. "Don't look back, guys. It'll only draw it closer." And just like that, as if obeying his command, the phantom car disappeared. Later, we shared our spooky tale with Nick's uncle, who just shrugged it off. He advised against night driving, but assured us it was nothing more than a common occurrence, nothing to fret about. That night's journey remained etched in our minds, a blend of thrill and unexplained mystery. Driving through the dark, with only the headlights to guide us, we felt like adventurers in an unknown world. The highway stretched endlessly, with only the occasional flicker of distant lights breaking the monotony of the night. The encounter with the ghostly vehicle transformed the trip into something more than just a ride. It was a brush with the unexplainable. The silence in the car was thick, each of us lost in our thoughts, pondering over what we had just witnessed. The excitement of possibly seeing the mysterious car again lingered in the air. Yet as the miles passed and we moved further away from the highway, the anticipation slowly turned to relief. The feeling of being followed, watched by something not of this world, gradually faded away, leaving behind a sense of wonder and a touch of fear. Finally, we reached our destination, the quaint town where Nick's family lived. The familiar sight of houses and the warm glow of streetlights felt comforting after the eerie journey. We stepped out of the car, stretching our legs, still feeling the adrenaline of the night's adventure coursing through our veins. As we recounted our tale to Nick's family, their reactions ranged from disbelief to knowing nods. It seemed our experience wasn't unique, yet it was something that would stay with us forever. In the days that followed, I often found myself looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see that blue mini truck lurking in the shadows. The mystery of that night remained unsolved, a story to tell and retell each time with a shiver and a glance back into the darkness. That night on the California highway showed us a side of the world we hadn't known, where the lines between reality and the supernatural blurred, leaving us with a story that was as haunting as it was unforgettable. The creeping eyes in the apartment. Ever since I moved into this apartment, my unease has been growing day by day, all because of the tenant across the hallway. Each time I stepped out of my apartment, I could feel a pair of eyes peering at me through a slightly ajar door. At first I flattered myself, thinking maybe I was somehow popular. But those brown eyes lurking in the shadows, they held a malevolent, lecherous gaze that seemed to pierce right through me. So I started leaving my apartment hastily, not daring to look back, yet feeling the intensity of that gaze following me. My name is Alyssa, and I have never felt so afraid. Afraid that one day that person might lose control and come after me. But since they never actually did anything overt, I felt helpless to act. You know that peculiar feeling you get when someone is watching you. I felt it so strongly that it became impossible to ignore. Day by day, it was pushing me to the edge. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I decided to confront the person behind the door. After all, someone who only dares to stare probably isn't that dangerous, right? So there I was, standing in front of my door, mustering up the courage. As usual, the door across the hallway was slightly open, those detestable eyes rolling about, fixated on me. I shouted, "How long are you going to keep watching me? Do you realize how much you're disturbing me?" There was a flicker of panic, a hint of unease in those eyes, but they continued to stare. "I'll call the police if you keep this up. Your staring is really scaring me." The eyes seemed to grow more agitated. "Do you like me or something? If that's the case, just say it. I don't have a boyfriend, and who knows, maybe I would have considered it if you had the courage to speak up." After hearing this, the once lively eyes started to lose their vigor, dimming as if life was ebbing away from them. Seeing this, I panicked, thinking maybe the person was in some kind of trouble. I rushed over and pushed the door open, only to find a clothing mannequin toppling over. It had been propped against the door, its eyes peeking through the gap. The room was empty. Whose eyes were those then? I slowly turned towards the mannequin lying on the floor. Its expressionless face gradually morphed into a smile as the door gently closed behind me. I stood there, frozen in disbelief, the room now sealed with the closed door, felt suffocating. My heart raced and a cold sweat broke out. The mannequin's lifeless eyes seemed to mock my fear, its smile growing wider in the dim light. A million thoughts raced through my mind. Was this some sick joke? A twisted setup by someone with a dark sense of humor? Or was there something more sinister at play? The empty room echoed with a silence that was louder than any scream, and the air felt thick with unspoken dread. I backed away, my eyes locked on the mannequin's unsettling grin. Every step I took felt heavier, as if the very atmosphere was trying to keep me there. But I managed to turn around and dash back to my apartment, slamming the door shut behind me. Leaning against the door, my breathing was heavy, my mind a whirlwind of fear and confusion. I wondered if I should call someone, but who would believe such a bizarre story? A mannequin that smiles, eyes that watch from an empty room. It sounded like a scene straight out of a horror movie, not something you'd expect in real life. For the rest of the night, sleep was a stranger. Every creak of the building, every whisper of the wind seemed like a signal that something was coming for me. I couldn't shake the image of those eyes, the haunting gaze that felt so real, so alive. The next day I made inquiries about the apartment across the hall. The landlord casually mentioned that it had been vacant for months. No one had lived there since the previous tenant, a reclusive artist, had suddenly left town. The revelation sent shivers down my spine. If the apartment was empty, then who or what was watching me? I considered moving out, but something inside me resisted. A part of me needed answers, a closure to the creeping terror that had enveloped my life. So I stayed, but with a wary eye always cast towards that mysterious door across the hallway. The mannequin, the peering eyes, the silent room, they all became a part of my daily life, a haunting melody that played in the background of my existence. I never opened that door again, but the memory of what I saw and felt that night remained with me, a chilling reminder that some mysteries are better left unsolved. A week of nightmares. It's about 3:30 a.m. I let out a long sigh, reassuring myself that I'm awake. For 5 consecutive nights now, I've been jolted awake at this exact time. But to be honest, I'm not even sure if it's a dream. It feels more like, just before I wake up, an unknown force grips me, violently pulling my soul from my body. In those split seconds, I can sense everything. The beating of my heart, the rush of blood in my arteries, the rise and fall of my chest, the whirring thoughts in my brain. Becoming utterly meaningless, everything comes to a halt. Then I snap open my eyes, and as I crash back onto the bed, I catch a glimpse of a dark shadow fleeting over me. What is this shadow? I'm certain it's not a figment of my imagination, so I've kept it to myself. You're just too stressed out. That's the response I'd expect to get. 3:30 a.m. again. I sigh deeply, affirming my consciousness, awakened by the nightmare once more, struggling to breathe, feeling the helplessness at death's edge. I see the shadow again. But over these days, my fear has given way to a deeper curiosity, and this time I see the shadow more clearly. Normally, shadows are cast by light blocked by an object. But this shadow floating in the air seems different, like a tangible entity, yet still giving off a sense of being an alive shadow. In the instant I wake up, I react immediately, leaping from my bed, trying to grab hold of the shadow. It seems to flee, not just vanishing into thin air. I watch as it moves through the ceiling and disappears into the wall. Living in an apartment, the ceiling is someone else's floor, but who lives above me? I realize I have no idea. 3:30 a.m. yet again. I'd exhale slowly, ensuring I'm awake. Is it a nightmare waking me? I think I hear noises coming from the apartment above. Some lights flicker outside. I get up and walk to the window. An ambulance is parked downstairs. Why at this hour? What happened upstairs? Moments later, paramedics carry someone out on a stretcher, a person or a corpse. That night I don't sleep anymore. Lying in bed, I stare at the ceiling. Gas poisoning, the news says. An elderly woman living alone, dead in her apartment for a whole week before being discovered yesterday. The next morning, I asked the building manager about the incident upstairs. The answer astonishes me. I'm shocked to learn that an old lady lived above me, and she died a week ago, the same day my nightmares began. A week, my nightmares, that dark shadow. Was it the old lady causing my nightmares? Or was the shadow my own nightmare, breaking free from my mind, turning into reality, killing the old woman? I don't want to think about it anymore. Since that day, I've been sleeping deeply. As the days passed, the shadow in my nightmares became a constant presence, a dark specter lurking at the edges of my sleep. Each night as the clock neared 3:30 a.m., a sense of dread would settle over me, a prelude to the inevitable awakening. The shadow wasn't just a figment of my imagination. It felt real, tangible, as if it had a life of its own. Every night it grew bolder, coming closer, its form more defined. It was no longer just a fleeting glimpse. It was a haunting entity that seemed to be reaching out to me. The night after learning about the old lady's death, I lay awake, my mind racing with thoughts. The connection between the shadow and the old lady's death was too coincidental to ignore. Was the shadow a manifestation of her spirit, trapped and seeking help? Or was it something more malevolent, a harbinger of death that had claimed her life? I tossed and turned, unable to find peace. The room felt colder, the shadows darker. And then, just as the clock struck 3:30 a.m., I heard it, a faint whisper, a sigh coming from the ceiling above. It sent shivers down my spine. I got out of bed and slowly approached the spot where I had seen the shadow disappear. Standing there, I felt a chill in the air, a sense of something unseen watching me. I reached out, half expecting to touch something, but my hand grasped only air. The next few nights were a blur of sleepless anxiety. The shadow continued to visit me, each encounter leaving me more drained, more terrified. I began to wonder if I was losing my grip on reality. Was I being haunted, or was it all in my head? The answer came on the 7th night. As I lay in bed, waiting for the shadow, I heard the whisper again, but this time it was clearer, more distinct. It was a voice full of sorrow and longing. It spoke my name, a plea for help that resonated deep within my soul. In that moment, I understood. The shadow was not there to harm me. It was a lost soul, reaching out from beyond, trapped between worlds. The old lady had died alone, her spirit lingering, seeking closure. From that night on, the shadow no longer brought fear. Instead, I felt a sense of compassion, a desire to help. I spoke to the shadow, offering words of comfort, assuring it that it was not forgotten, that its presence was acknowledged. Gradually the visit ceased and my nightmares faded away. The old lady's spirit had found peace, and so had I. The experience left me with a newfound respect for the mysteries of life and death, a reminder that we are all connected in ways we may never fully understand. Sleep came easier after that, a restful slumber free from the haunting presence of the shadow. The experience became a part of my story, a chapter in my life that taught me about the unseen forces that surround us, the thin veil between the living and the dead. The Death Bus, a college student's terrifying encounter with mysterious passengers. First off, I need to make it clear that this story is based on my own experiences. There's nothing I've heard from others or made up. It's all real. Some parts might seem so unbelievable that even I would doubt them if I hadn't experienced them myself. So if there are any doubts, let's discuss, but please, no anger. I'm just an ordinary person, not some mystical figure, so each story I tell is one I've lived through. They might not be as thrilling as the novels you find online, and updates might be slow. After all, for me, each story represents a life or death decision. Lastly, I'm still alive, which means I'll keep updating this thread. I can't say when exactly, as encountering ghosts isn't something I can predict, nor do I know when I might not return. Enough preamble, let's dive into the main story. Today's tale is titled The Death Bus. This happened several years ago in a small town. I was in college, and the new semester was about to start. I was getting my luggage ready to return to school. On the night before my departure, my friends threw a farewell party for me, and we drank until late into the night. After parting ways with them, I found myself walking alone on the deserted streets, wondering why it was so cold and why there was no one around. I expected at least some traffic. Lost in these thoughts, I continued walking and passed by the bus station. Noticing that the lights in the waiting room were still on, I remembered that I hadn't bought my bus ticket yet. Since it was my last day and there seemed to be someone still there, I decided to buy it to avoid trouble the next day. As I entered the waiting room, I noticed the dim lighting. Why's the station so stingy with the lights, I thought, but shrugged it off and headed to the ticket counter. The woman behind the counter had long hair, but her face was obscured by the dim light. I jokingly imagined she must be attractive, paid for my ticket to the state capitol for 6:30 a.m. the next morning, and went home. That night I had a bizarre dream. I dreamt I was at the bus station, ready to board, but the bus in my dream exuded a strange aura. Standing beside it with my luggage, I felt something was off. Suddenly, I looked up and saw the bus's wheels pointing skyward. How did they get on top of the bus? And why was the roof emitting black smoke? Just then, an unseen force tried to pull me onto the bus, but I resisted. The struggle continued until my dad woke me up. It was 5 a.m., and while it's unusual to remember a dream from the night before so vividly, this one stayed clear in my mind. Yet I didn't think much of it and headed to the station with my dad. Arriving at the station, it seemed deserted except for us. I pushed the door open, passed through the waiting area, and made my way to the parking lot. A solitary bus was parked there. Something about it felt ominous, but I couldn't pinpoint what. With a sense of unease, I stored my luggage and boarded the bus with my dad. As I stepped on, I was struck by how cold it felt, not a physical cold, but more like a chill emanating from within. The dim lights in the aisle barely illuminated the faces of the passengers, elderly people on the left and young men and women on the right. The bus was nearly full, just 2 seats remaining. I found it odd how the seating seemed segregated by age. Nevertheless, I took a seat on the right, preparing to wave goodbye to my dad, when the memory of my dream hit me. A deep fear surged within me, and suddenly I found myself unable to move. Panicked, I remembered a scene from Harry Potter where a character overcomes fear-induced paralysis by inflicting pain on themselves. Lacking a better option, I fished out a compass from my backpack and jabbed it into my thigh. The pain was enough to get me moving. I grabbed my luggage and bolted off the bus. As I was leaving, a pair of young boys boarded. Something about them seemed off, but I couldn't quite place it. The bus door shut behind them and slowly drove off. My dad asked what was wrong, but I couldn't explain and just told him I got on the wrong bus. We tried to return to the waiting room to stay warm, but found all the doors locked, a confusing and unnerving discovery. We eventually made our way to the station's main entrance, only to find it locked as well. Puzzled and without options, we sat on the steps until daylight. The sound of doors opening startled us. We stood up, ready to confront the staff, only to be greeted by 2 security guards. Before I could speak, they brandished their batons and accused us of being thieves. Thieves? My dad and I were dumbfounded. The guards took us to the security office, and after some back and forth, they called the police. Soon, the station manager arrived. I explained everything, showing my ticket as proof. The manager confirmed it was a valid ticket from the station, but insisted no one was working the previous night. Just then, my uncle, who was the chief of police, arrived. He listened to our story and suggested letting us go, as there was no evidence of wrongdoing and he vouched for us. With no further objections, we were released. My dad invited my uncle over for lunch later that day, a decision that seemed trivial at the time. However, what happened next firmly anchored this event in the realm of the supernatural. During lunch, my uncle casually mentioned how busy he'd been, with an unusual number of deaths recently, all with seemingly natural causes, yet strangely coincidental. This sparked a realization about the 2 boys who boarded the bus. They had no shadows and seemed to float rather than walk. I blurted out that there had been 28 deaths, half elderly, the last 2 being young boys reported that morning. My uncle's gaze fixed on me, demanding to know how I knew such specific details. I explained everything, from my dream to the encounter at the station, and our bewildered silence filled the room. Later, I learned my uncle had persuaded the local government to build a new bus station, citing security concerns due to high foot traffic in the old area. The old station was demolished, and a temple was erected in its place, serving as a community center for the elderly. Curious, I asked my uncle about his report. He replied, "What could I have written? The truth. Even if the higher-ups believed it, it would only cause more trouble." I had no response, just a deep sense of unease about the mysterious and unexplainable events that had transpired. As the days passed, the incident at the bus station began to feel like a distant, if not unsettling, memory. Life resumed its usual pace, but the shadow of that eerie morning lingered in the back of my mind. One evening, while studying in my dorm, I received a call from my dad. His voice was tense, and he asked if I remembered the strange events surrounding the bus station. Before I could respond, he told me something that sent a chill down my spine. The bus I had almost boarded that fateful morning was found in a ravine outside the town. It had crashed under mysterious circumstances, and all the passengers on board were found dead. I was speechless. The reality of what could have been my fate had I stayed on that bus weighed heavily on me. My father continued, explaining that the investigation into the crash revealed no mechanical faults or driver errors. It was as if the bus had been driven off the road by an unseen force. The news spread quickly throughout the town, and rumors began to circulate. Some said the bus was cursed. Others believed it was an act of vengeance by restless spirits. The townsfolk, who had once dismissed the supernatural, now whispered in hushed tones about the unexplainable tragedy. In the weeks that followed, I couldn't shake off the feeling of being watched. It was as if the ghostly passengers of that ill-fated bus were reaching out from beyond, a reminder of the narrow escape I had from joining them in their eternal journey. The experience left an indelible mark on me. I became more cautious, more aware of the thin veil that separates the living from the spectral world. The mundane reality of everyday life was now interspersed with a heightened sense of the unknown, the unexplained. As I share this story, I wonder about the fate of those lost souls on the death bus. Were they just unfortunate victims of a tragic accident, or were they part of something far more sinister, a mystery that defies explanation? The truth remains shrouded in the shadows of that fateful day, a chilling reminder of the thin line between life and death. And so my story ends here, but the journey through the unknown continues. As long as I live, I'll keep seeking answers, venturing into the shadows in search of the truth that lurks within. The phantom of the New York subway. In early 2007, I received a call from a friend in need of urgent financial help. I agreed to lend him $20,000 and decided to deliver the cash by taking the New York subway the next morning. I woke up early and caught the first subway of the day, a nearly empty R train rumbling through the quiet stations. It was a Sunday, and the city was still asleep. At the empty carriage, I was joined by a girl in a red jacket, around 17 or 18, with delicate features. She seemed startled by the emptiness and hesitated, but the doors had already closed. She moved closer to me, looping her arm through mine. Her hands were stunningly beautiful, slender and almost translucent. My heart raced. Was this my lucky break in love? The girl leaned close and whispered, "Are you not scared?" "Scared of what?" I asked. "The carriage is full of ghosts," she claimed. I tried to dismiss her claim humorously, suggesting she was trying to trick me, but she insisted, handing me a pair of pink glasses. Reluctantly, I put them on and was horrified to see the carriage indeed appeared full of ghostly figures, silent and pale. I was stunned. How did we switch from the R line to the A line without noticing? The girl snuggled closer for warmth, and I found comfort in her presence despite the eerie situation. As we approached 50th Street, the announcement for 59th Street, Columbus Circle Station, came, and the ghostly passengers began to orderly exit the train. I shook hands with the little boy, his hand ice cold, sending a chill down my spine. Left alone with the girl, I felt a strange connection. But as we exited the subway, she thanked me and walked away, leaving me with a mix of emotions and unanswered questions. I reached my friend's house and recounted the event. He laughed, explaining that the pink glasses were a popular novelty item that created illusions. But as I checked my pocket, I realized my $20,000 was gone, a costly lesson on the New York subway. Shaken by the disappearance of the girl and my money, I found myself in a daze as I wandered the streets of New York. The city, normally so familiar, felt alien and surreal. I couldn't shake the image of the ghostly passengers and the haunting empty gaze of the little boy. I decided to report the incident to the NYPD, hoping to at least recover my lost funds. The officer listened to my story with a mix of skepticism and amusement. "Ghosts on the subway, huh? That's a new one," he chuckled. I left the station feeling foolish and defeated. Days passed, and the memory of the red-jacketed girl haunted my thoughts. I retraced my steps, riding the same subway line at the same hour, half hoping, half fearing to encounter her or the phantoms again. But the trains were always crowded with the living, the ghostly apparitions nowhere to be seen. Then, one evening, I saw her again. She was standing on the platform of the 59th Street, Columbus Circle Station, still wearing that red jacket. Our eyes met, and she smiled, a knowing, enigmatic smile. Before I could approach her, she stepped onto an arriving train and disappeared into the crowd. I never saw her again. The mystery of the girl in the red jacket and the phantom-filled subway carriage remained unsolved, a bizarre chapter in my life that I could never fully explain. It left me with a lingering sense of the uncanny, a reminder of the mysteries and unexpected turns life can take in the heart of a city like New York.